Welcome to this introduction to HURREVAC's Storm Simulator tool. It's a feature in the program that lets you, the user, make your own custom hurricane track to support training and exercises. So this video is for you if you're already familiar with HURREVAC, but haven't used the Storm Simulator yet and you want to see an overview of its capabilities, or if you're getting started for yourself and you'd like to see a step-by-step guide of how all this comes together. That's what we're here to help with. And we have another video that shows some more tips and tricks for really customizing and getting the most out of all the features that Storm Simulator has. For more experienced users, we'd also encourage you to check that out as you get more comfortable. But before we get started, a couple of important notes. Storm Simulator is a relatively simple engine that lets you build a hurricane track. It is not a full-fledged weather model, and so it can't tell you what a real-world storm would do, nor should it be used that way. You have to come into Storm Simulator already knowing what you want your scenario to be, where the storm starts, where it goes, how strong it is, what time of year. And then Storm Simulator takes your inputs and then it generates a track in more detail that you can start to interact with in the program and use HURREVAC as you're going through your exercise, or use it to create graphics to support that tabletop. Also note that a simulated storm has a more limited set of products than a storm that is real that has advisories from the NHC. So a simulated storm is not going to come along with anything about storm surge or rainfall forecasts or the wind time of arrival or anything probabilistic, but it does give you the wind field and some deterministic forecasts and a handful of reports that you can use, and we'll walk through that at the end and you can see how it looks. So now it's time to do a quick tour of the workspace, and we'll start at the upper left in the Storms tab, and you'll see that there are several folders, and one at the bottom is called Simulated Storms. And if you're brand new to this, your Simulated Storms folder will be empty, but once you've made one and saved it, it will populate there, and that's also where you can import a storm from another user, which we'll show you how to do. Right above that is exercise storms, and you may be asking yourself, what's the difference? An exercise storm tends to be created outside of HURREVAC by experts and then brought into the program to support state and regional tabletop exercises. And they often have more detail and more forecast products that come along with them. But it wouldn't hurt for you to go in there and check out what's available, and that may give you some idea of how to approach building an exercise. Now we're ready to get started, and to open the Storm Simulator panel, we're going to go to the toolbox at the lower left and find the icon for Storm Simulator and click that button. And now the panel for Storm Simulator opens from the right side of the workspace. And it basically works in chronological order from top to bottom, where you start with some inputs and then have steps along the way. So the top part is where you give it a name and you assign the general track that you want it to take and select the dates. And below that is where you will build out the track details, followed by a section for creating the forecasts. And then at the bottom, you can save your storm or start over again. And things that are not available to you are grayed out initially. And you'll also want to keep an eye on the messages panel at the very bottom because it may tell you some helpful tips, or let you know about any error messages, or let you know when something has worked successfully. So now let's go back up to the top, and I want to point out one more thing. The question mark icon in the top right corner is a direct link to the HURREVAC user guide page all about the Storm Simulator. That's also where you can get a step-by-step guide and a very helpful FAQ section. Now we're back over into our HURREVAC tab. So we're almost ready to get started, but I'll explain the difference between these three buttons at the top. We have Use Example, Import Current Storm, and Add Waypoints. And there's some different methods you can take to building the track. Add Waypoints, which is what we're going to do today, requires you to basically do everything, but it's a good way to learn the program. And it's also a good way to build a scenario for something that hasn't happened before or hasn't happened in a very long time. Import Current Storm is where you would already take a track that exists in HURREVAC's archive going back to 2005 and then use that as the basis for your simulation. So you can either make it almost identical and just change the name and the date, or you can take that historic track and get a general capture of it and try to change a few details. That can be a successful approach, and we'll show you how to do that in our next video. Over at the left is Use Example, and that's where the tool will just populate some waypoints on the map for you, and that's a good way to get some practice in before you make your own exercise. But for this video, to really show you how everything works, a good place to start is Add Waypoints. But before I even do that, I have to know what I want my scenario to be. So in this case, let's say I want something that can be used for the Mid-Atlantic or New England, involving a hurricane that comes out of the Southwest Atlantic Ocean and then veers up the eastern seaboard. Well, first I have to give it a name, and it can be anything you want as long as it's over 3 characters. So we're going to call this Hurricane Apollo. And now I'm ready to start adding my waypoints. I'm going to click this button. And notice that something has changed. It now says Done Waypoints. We're going to click this button again after we're done placing our waypoints on the map. So what is a waypoint? Well, we'll think about this sort of like a tent pole or a snapshot of each day in the life of the hurricane. We're going to place several of them. This is not the place to give it hourly detail. The Storm Simulator tool will do that for us in the next step. But you want a general sketch of what that track is going to be like. And we're going to start by looking at the tracking map, and note that the pointer has now changed to this black map marker icon. And so the next time I click, it's going to place that map marker there. And indeed, I've done that, and it's called waypoint number 1. Now when I move the pointer, there's now a floating indicator for what the forward speed would be to place another waypoint at that spot. So the closer the next waypoint is to number 1, it's showing a slower forward speed, and the farther away, it's showing a much faster forward speed in knots. And remember, we want this to be pretty realistic. So I'm thinking, where do I want this storm to be 24 hours later? And let's put it here to the northeast of Puerto Rico. That's waypoint number 2. And now it's connected by a line. And I'll continue to click here in the Southwest Atlantic for waypoint number 3 and 4. And I'll have a curve to the north here, east of Cape Hatteras at waypoint number 5. And as I go, I can actually adjust the tracking map. So if I were to click and drag, I can still move the map around that way. And also I can use my middle mouse wheel to zoom in and place these with a little more precision. So one best practice is that you want one of your waypoints to be at or around the time of the final landfall. And so waypoint number 6 is what I want to be my landfall here in New England. And you don't want to stop there. You also want to continue placing waypoints after that to show the storm either dissipating or moving entirely out of the area. Because if you don't do that, the forecast products that it will create are not going to be very realistic. So I'll need another waypoint out here in the Canadian Maritimes for the day after, and maybe even continuing it out into the North Atlantic on waypoint number 8. And zooming out, you can now see that I have a general outline of a hurricane with 1 point for each day. Now let's go back over to the table. I'm going to click Done Waypoints to stop the process and talk about what I have in this table. The column on the left shows the numbers for the waypoints. Then I have the dates, and these are automatically spaced 24 hours apart. And we recommend, especially if you're getting to know this for the first time, that you keep it that way. But you can make adjustments to date and time, and we'll show you how to do that too. The next column is for the strength, from tropical depression all the way up to category 5. Now, by default, each waypoint is placed at tropical depression, and we're going to have to make those adjustments to turn it into a hurricane, which we'll do shortly. Then there's a column for moving the waypoints if you want to do some fine tuning. You can also delete one if necessary. There are indicators for the latitude and longitude, along with the average forward speed of that storm between those points. And remember, that is in knots. So the next thing I'm going to do is change the strength to make this become a hurricane and then weaken. So we do want this to start as a tropical depression, and waypoint number 1 already shows that. So now we're going to click into row number 2 to show this becoming a tropical storm. And I'll click that selection, or TS, from the list. And I have to click the update button for that to take effect. If I click out before I do that, it won't save the change. And now I'm up to waypoint number 3 and see that it's highlighted on the tracking map as I have that row selected in the table. And here's where I'm going to say that our storm has strengthened into a category 1 hurricane, and click update. And then so on into waypoint number 4. Here's where we will have it become a category 3 hurricane to the east of Florida, and click update. And at waypoint number 5, category 2 strength near Cape Hatteras. And finally, at waypoint number 6, or landfall, we'll maintain category 2 strength and click update. For waypoint 7, after it's moved through the area, we would expect some weakening. We'll say that perhaps it's STS, and that stands for strong tropical storm. And then finally, waypoint number 8, we can have that weakening back to tropical depression strength. I'm also going to show you an example of what it looks like to move one of these waypoints to do some fine tuning. So maybe I'd like to take waypoint number 5 and just move it a little farther offshore. So I come in and click in this row and click the icon that corresponds to waypoint number 5 and see how it's now highlighted in red on the map. And my pointer is now the map marker icon again. So the next time I click, it's going to move waypoint number 5 to that new location. So I'm going to click just a little bit to the right, and you see how that's taken effect there. And I can make all kinds of fine adjustments for each one of these waypoints, but there are some ways you can make bulk adjustments for each one of them. And the first thing I'm going to do is shift the dates. So maybe you know you want your exercise to have the landfall at a particular date and time. And so that's why we made a waypoint at the landfall location, so you could make your date selection relative to waypoint number 6 there in landfall in New England, and change this either using the date selector or type it in to August 10th, 2026. And you could even change the hour to happen in the morning or in the afternoon in universal time. Click confirm and now see that the dates and times for all the other waypoints in our table here have shifted relative to that change we made for waypoint number 6. So now our storm is going to start on August 5th. The next button next to that is called Shift Track, and that's where you can adjust the waypoints all at once in a particular direction rather than one by one, and we're going to cover that in the next video. And the other button in the lower right corner of the table is called Clear, and that's going to give you a clean slate, but be careful with clicking that because it's not going to ask you to confirm it. So only do that if you're really ready to start over again. We are now ready to build our track and see what this would look like with advisories every 6 hours. And I click the Build Track button in the selection below the table. And what HURREVAC has done is it has zoomed me into the very first advisory point. And the reason why is that HURREVAC likes to show simulated storms and exercise storms in chronological order. And this will make more sense maybe after it's done, but we don't want to reveal what happens with the exercise before it occurs, especially if you want to have some element of surprise. And also, starting at the beginning gives you the benefit of going through step by step and advisory by advisory and making sure that this is really what you want. But it has zoomed in quite a ways into the map. So let's use the Zoom to Full Map Extent icon in the right side toolbar to go back out to the Atlantic Basin view. And another thing I'm going to do to give myself more room on the map is collapse the left side panel because I don't need anything in there right now. So now I'll use the storm status bar at the top to see how many advisories I get out of that. And it goes all the way out to advisory 29. And if I make that selection, you can see that this is what our track looks like for Hurricane Apollo. And our legend at the bottom and our time at the top really does start to look like what you would have with a real storm in HURREVAC, but it's not fully built out yet. I can go back to advisory 15 and I can turn on the forecast wind field. But if I were to turn on the error cone or potential track area, nothing exists yet. And that's because I haven't gone to that next step of building the forecast. So let's turn these off and keep going. But back here where we're on this step where we just clicked build track, note that there are two other buttons. One is go back, and that takes you back to the step of building or adjusting your waypoints. And the other is edit track. And so if you want to make a pretty big change to your track, like let's say you actually wanted to make this a stronger hurricane or keep it farther offshore, if you wanted to make big changes, you would click go back and adjust your waypoints. But if you want to make really small changes to that track or to the wind field of the hurricane, you would click edit track. And that's more detailed, and we'll cover that in the next video. But moving this out advisory by advisory, if we're pretty satisfied with what we have here, if we think this is going to work for us, we would be ready to move on to the next step of building the forecast. There's a slider you can interact with to introduce varying amounts of bias into this forecast or error to the left or to the right of the track that ends up happening. So by default, it's on centered, meaning that the forecasts you build are going to be very similar to the track that ends up happening. And that would be a scenario where the forecasts were very, very accurate. But maybe the point of your exercise is to introduce some element of surprise and have the participants react to things as the forecast evolves. So let's say we moved this forecast bias slider to the left and clicked build forecasts. Watch what happens. The forecasts starting at advisory 1 are going to be shifted to the left of what actually ends up happening. So let's turn on my error cone and you see that it can now be built because I have forecast points going out all the way to 5 days. Or you also see where we can click go back and maybe add more or less or change the nature of the forecast bias and just experiment with it and see what kind of results you get and whether that works for you. So now let's show what it looks like to build a little bit of forecast error to the right side of the track and move that slider over and click Build Forecast again. And we're going to get forecast points out to 5 days, but now see how it has a different look to it. So we know that the storm is eventually going to make landfall in New England, but the initial forecast shows those forecast points out somewhat to the east, even though we are still in the potential track area cone. There's also a button in the forecast section where you can manually edit the details of those forecasts for each advisory. And there's a lot of fine tuning that can happen there as well, and we will also cover that in the other storm simulator video. So it is introducing that level of forecast error to each advisory along the track of the storm. And if that works for you, if you're looking at this and you see that this will work for your exercise and you're ready to move on, now we are at the point where the Save Storm button is enabled. And there's also another button next to it called Start Over. And if you click that, that is going to clear out everything to a blank slate and you'll start the entire process over. And it also does not ask you to confirm. So be careful about clicking Start Over. Also be careful, if you close out of HURREVAC or log out, it is not saved your progress up to now. A storm doesn't exist in your user profile until you have clicked Save Storm. And you're certainly welcome to save something as a draft and then continue iterating on it the next time you log into HURREVAC. So let's go ahead and click Save Storm and see what happens. It thinks for a second and then the interface clears out and I get a notification that pops up to say that my simulated storm was successfully saved. And it's listed in the folder in the Storms tab. So let's open this left panel again and open the Simulated Storms folder and now see that Apollo exists in my list of simulated storms. So to click on that checkbox and turn it on the map, there it is. And note that it will load from the first advisory. Again, active real-world storms will always load to the very latest advisory, but when you're running an exercise, you want things to appear in chronological order. And so Storm Simulator will start at advisory number 1. So let's close this notification and close out of our Storm Simulator panel and review the map layers that we do and we don't get with this simulated storm. So let's move out to, say, advisory 19, when our storm is just to the east of the mid-Atlantic. So to turn on the forecast wind field or the wind rings, those exist and those can be animated out into the future. We also have the deterministic wind swath, but we do not have a probabilistic wind swath. In fact, none of these probabilistic map tools, like location-based wind probabilities or the wind time of arrival graphic or the graphical wind probabilities, are going to show anything corresponding to a simulated storm. You also do not have a depiction of the wind watches and warnings or of the peak surge graphic or potential storm surge flooding, nor will it show anything about rainfall. The conditions tab only shows live weather data or recent forecasts. So what that means in terms of what you can show for reports, we would be limited to the deterministic wind timing report. And when we generate that, you will see that it shows data for many of these counties in New England and along the eastern seaboard. But if I go to create the probabilistic wind timing report, you will see that there's no valid data for it to work with. So closing out of these reports and moving back over to the folder in our Storms tab, I want to show you how you can import and export a simulated storm so you can share it with other users on your team and all be working with the same situation as you go through your exercise. When I'm hovering over this row, there's a 3-dot menu that when I click on it, I see options here. I can remove from profile, which deletes the storm. I can share by storm ID, and I can edit storm. We'll come back to editing storm in the next video, but what I want to do is share by storm ID. And when I click on that, it says copy this storm ID to share your simulated storm with another HURREVAC user, AL169C8S. So storm ID is a unique alphanumeric code for each simulated storm that you create. It's also noted here in the legend at the bottom, and that is a text that you can copy into an email or some other messaging platform and send out to your team. And then once you have that, how would you go about importing that into your HURREVAC workspace? So to add a simulated storm from another user, we hover over the name of the folder itself and see that there's also a 3-button menu in the right side. And we click on that and see an option to add a shared simulation by storm ID. And that opens a small window where we enter or paste that identifier. And I'm going to paste in an identifier for a different simulated storm that was made earlier, AL054BCS, and click confirm. And now it is loaded into my folder, but not onto the map, this other storm that I made from a different account. And its name is Ivy, and it has an asterisk at the end of it. So when you import a simulated storm, the imported ones that are made by other users have an asterisk next to the name. And that means you can delete it from your workspace, but you can't delete it for everybody, and you can't make any changes to it. So what you see is what you get. And Ivy here is a scenario that moves through the Caribbean and up the eastern seaboard in similar fashion. So let's use this as an example of how to delete a simulated storm from your profile. We will go back to that menu on the right side of the row and click Remove from Profile. And in the notification at the top right, click Yes. And there I'm left with Apollo. So that's a rundown of the main steps to building a simulated storm. But as I mentioned along the way, there's a lot of other fine-tuning you can do to the track and the forecasts, and you can even adjust the size of the wind field or some of the text products that are associated with the storm. And you can find out all about how to do that in the HURREVAC user guide and also in our part 2 video here on the HURREVAC YouTube channel.